Hi everyone, hope you're having a great time with the Virtually Crafty event. I want to extend my great thank you to Jamie and to Carl for putting this on, and to everyone that helped to support this, from all of the other creatives that were either involved in the website building or presenting today. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I think in these times, it's so wonderful to come together as a community and share. Hopefully you guys can all hear me, and you can see very well. I've installed a light up here since the last time I did a live. This is my first live event where I'm sharing across multiple places other than just my Facebook page, small little communities. So thank you so much for coming and being a part, and it's so great to see the chat filling up and everybody being cordial. So thanks guys for coming over to my studio. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is my little studio here. I'm in the second floor of my house. Someday I hope to have an actual studio, but this suffices. I'm a small batch studio where I make small pieces for things like weddings, small events, gifts for small groups of customers that maybe businesses are looking to do. And I'm also supplying a local gift shop. I just want to quickly go through some of the tools that I use as a potter, because I know most of you are wood turners, and I'm trying to dabble in that myself and doing some mixed medium. So I wanted to talk through a couple of things that I use and employ pretty regularly when I'm sitting at the pottery wheel that will look very similar to some of the tools that you use when you're turning wood, or if you're just basically a woodworker overall, some of the things that are kindred to what I use here. The first thing that is very important to me is a sponge. Now, you guys probably don't use a sponge, but when you start thinking about abrasives and different things that you're using for finishing, the sponge is very important throughout the entire throwing process. So that's really key, because it lubricates the vessel while I'm throwing, and it also helps me with finishing and smoothing the surface when I'm done. I use a pretty heavy grog clay, so when I use the sponge, I have to be pretty liberal or pretty limited on my use of it at the end, because the grog will sometimes get pulled to the surface, which kind of reverses the whole smoothing process. I also use a wooden potter's tool. So very similar to something that you would be using on a lathe to shape your wooden piece, I use this to shape and finish my clay. I'll show you how I use this later. I also have what kind of looks like a fish face. This is a Dirty Girls tool. I really like the name, it's kind of funny to me. But it's got this little fish mouth here, and I use it to add a flange on the bottom of my pieces. You can see with my cup of coffee here, there's a little lip on the bottom, and I use that to shape the bottom of my clay. Additionally, very important for my studio is to have some kind of measuring device. This is nice because it's nice and long, and I can just reach out and look at it while I'm also evaluating the shape and size of my piece overall. I can also see these tick marks to see actually how tall it is measurement-wise. Clay, as it dries, will shrink, and once it goes into the kiln, it also shrinks an additional amount. So I want to be careful not to throw my pieces too small, because they'll shrink. And obviously, you want your cup to hold enough liquid that you're not going back and forth to the coffee pot every time. This is a nice larger coffee mug, especially for those of you in the UK. I was there last year, and I cannot believe how small your coffee cups are. What are you thinking? Anyway, this is a unique piece that I've been making. I've been prototyping for the last year, and I'm finally getting ready to sell these. I've added some badges to them that say social distancing, and they've got, Sasquatch on there. I think everybody's aware of that iconic figure. But during the creation of this, I use a lot of these tools. Finally, I want to come to some of the tools that you would recognize. I'm sure a lot of you, when you're making lidded vessels, or even when you're just trying to hollow out the bottom of your piece so that you can put it reverse on your chuck, you're using something like this to get your measurement if you're not drawing on your piece to identify the width. But I use this when I make multi-piece vessels to make sure that I'm making my piece wide enough or thin enough so that I can fit the pieces together. Another part that you might recognize is a skewer, and I use this all different stages. And what this is great for is that I can use it for detailing. I can use it to pick pieces out of the clay that maybe got stuck there. I can clear out extra material that gets stuck when I do a handle. This is like a needle tool or an ice pick like Jimmy DeResta uses. Anyway, this is super helpful for my studio. I'm constantly losing these, so I have them all through my studio. Very similar to when you guys are using a saw, I just have a piece of wire that will cut pieces off my bat. So when I cut pieces off my bat, let me show you what that is. Ben made these for me. It's great to have a woodworker in the house. These are bats, and this is what the clay sits on. When I'm turning or throwing, some people call it turning, some people call it throwing. For this instance, I'll call it throwing. When I'm throwing a piece on my pottery wheel, there are pins on the wheel head, and they pop into these little holes so that as I'm throwing, I can be batching out work without having to get up from my pottery wheel, cut this off, all that other stuff. Ben is cool. He's my husband, and he's great. Additionally, we have some trimming tools. So once the clay gets about a little over leather hard, I'm going to put them back on the pottery wheel and trim them. We won't see that today, but I will share some videos specifically on trimming if you guys subscribe to my channel. I don't have many subscribers yet. I just started my channel. I started a channel a few years ago with my husband called Slap Stuff Together, so you may recognize me from there. You may recognize me from Instagram if you don't already follow. Hi, Robin. I'm so glad you're here. So a lot of you will use different devices for carving in different shapes while it's on your device, your lathe. For a potter, a lot of potters will start out with something like this. It's just a circular trimming tool. It's got a lot of different areas where you can turn your tool to shape as you're creating your foot, or maybe you want to create a belly vase or cut it in because you have too much material. A lot of the things that you employ on your lathe, you're going to be using these types of tools for. Additionally, I'm sure a lot of you, once you got to the point where you're pretty confident about making your vessels and understanding the depth and the width of your walls and keeping them even, you're thinking about surface texture. Now, when you're trimming, we also have chatter tools. I'm sure you guys have those too in trimming, and they look like this. They're a very thin piece of metal that just kind of chatters along the side and creates texture. And that's really great when you're using different glazes to highlight different features. So very similar to some of the things that you employ with finishing techniques as far as application of paints or dyes or even just, plain old oils. Those will show up differently based on the depth of your piece and the high points of your piece. So these chatter tools are really fun to use once you get really used to working with clay. So I think I've gone through most of these, and I'll show them later. But one thing that I didn't show you is something really fun that I just started using, and those are these. They're kind of the size of credit cards. They're a little bit thicker, so they have a little bit more rigidity. But as I'm throwing, if I press this into the side, there's some teeth here, and each side has a different amount of teeth. So you get these crazy shapes that you can put into your clay. So a little bit different than what you guys can do, but a lot of fun to get those different types of textures. So I think I've gone through most of the tools I have here. Let's get muddy. Just gonna move these off to the side. I've got several different weights of clay. It's important to kind of have an idea of what you want to throw before you get on the pottery wheel, because you need to know how much clay you're going to need. I heard once that people just kind of throwing out of fun might just take a random bit of clay, and what it's called is sketching in 3D. I think that's fun. I don't know if any of you guys do that when you start woodworking or when you start turning. But knowing how much wood blanks are, I'm sure you have a plan before you get started. All right, so you guys can see my wheel head here. I'm a messy potter. Sometimes you'll see on, are they cake tools? No, they are specifically made for pottery by a pottery company, but I have used cookware in my studio. So again, the pins here go here, and I'm trying to keep up with the chat. I've only seen a couple of questions, so if I don't answer your question, it's because I didn't see it. So just double ask your question. And Jamie, if I'm missing anything, if you don't mind, just like letting me know again. Thank you. My workspace. So Pittsburgh has a lot of really unique architecture, and this is the front of my house. So this peak is a decorative portion above my porch in the front of my house, or my stoop, you'd call it. I've got a little window here with like a rollout. It doesn't open all the way. It just kind of opens a crack, which is fine. But your best plans last for about minutes on the lathe. That's funny, because I know what you're talking about. Unless I have an order, I come in and I'm like, oh, maybe. Lisette, thank you for coming. All right, so the first thing is that I need to add water to my bat. This is important because I need something for the water to suction, or I need something for the clay to suction down on the bat with. So I add a little bit of water. It's not sopping wet. There's not a pool of water. There's just enough that the bat is nice and saturated. This is not a clean workshop. I'm going to pull my hair back so I don't get it caught on the live. It's never happened to me in real, like when I'm working, but I know sometimes it bothers me when I'm leaning forward and it's in there, so I'm going to pull it back. All right, so as I was saying, 4 different types of vessels, you're going to need different weights of clay. And if you know that you're just going to be throwing a shot glass, you don't need much clay. This is about 1/2 pound of clay. And I just throw it, try and get it in the center, but you can use your weight to push it into the center. And all I'm doing right now is just making sure it's secure to the bat. Hi, Barry. And then I'm doing a process called coning. And you won't be able to see it so much on 1/2 pound of clay. When we get to the larger sizes, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But I thought, just warm up a little bit, because I didn't take the time to do that. I was worried about camera angles and if I was pretty. All right, so once you get it centered, this is similar to mounting your piece on the chuck and getting the sides cleaned up so that you can actually start your turning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hole in the center. The worst thing that you can do is get your piece off center again after you've spent the time to cone up and cone down and get it centered. The coning process doesn't just help you center the clay, it also employs some of the wedging techniques that you do on a wedging table. Wedging is similar to when you're working with bread and you're trying to get all the air pockets out of the bread so it rises cleanly and bakes thoroughly. Hi, Sandra. Thanks, Robin. So, while I'm turning, what's happening is all of the clay particles are kind of aligning, and they're clearing space and making sure that they're homogenized. So any areas where maybe the clay was a little bit more dry or there was air pockets are being pushed out and evenly organized. So That helps so that while you're drying your clay, it doesn't dry unevenly, and then that causes cracking in the end. So it's very important to take the time to either wedge your clay or properly cone your clay. So right now I'm adding my hole, and if you can see, I'm not going straight down in with my fingers because that'll throw your center off. We're great at a lot of things, but finding the center of something super quick, not always that great. So what I'm doing is I'm basically putting my hands at an angle so that my walls are angled down in. And as I'm doing that, I'm pushing my hands across the bottom to compress the clay so that I don't end up with S-cracks as it's drying. And again, that's usually because the particles have not been compressed enough. So I'm going to remove some of the excess water that I have in here, and I am lubricating this as I go and making sure that Jimmy Moore. Those ghost jokes. Love it. I should put Unchained Melody on. Right now, I am going to even out my bottom and then start pulling my walls. And all I'm doing while I'm pulling my walls is I'm putting even pressure on the inside and outside. Thanks, Jimmy. All right. So now that I have my base structure made, I need to decide where I'm going from here. And this is basically just one of my little cups that I sell. So it's basically just a really small, short, stout cylinder. And it's a little big for liquor shots, but it's great for espresso. I started throwing these for Franco. I don't know if you guys know him, but he is a fellow woodworker and very awesome cook. He reached out to me to see if I could make him some espresso cups. And that's where we ended up, with some really cool little vessels that can be used for multiple purposes. So that's just a simple little vessel. As I was working, I was pulling up the sides and making sure my walls were even, so you guys know that that's very important. I was also compressing the rim. This is something you guys don't have to worry about, but potters do, because rims can crack over time and use, and they can even crack as they're drying. So compressing the rim just allows the clay to become stronger, and it also helps clean up the rim a little bit so that if it is used as a cup, you're not having to spend a whole lot of time standing and cleaning that up later, because you don't want whoever's going to use your cup to cut themselves. That would not be fun. All right, so when you make your cylinder and you're ready to trim it, before you actually take it off, or if you're going to put it to the side to let it dry on the bat, I do some pre-trimming with my potter's knife. We talked about this potter's knife a little bit, but some of them are angled a little shallow, and then other ones are really long. These are great because you can get right up and underneath, clean up your vessel, and then round your bottoms. Round your bottoms. What I'm doing now is I'm just stabilizing both hands, and I'm going to turn the wheel on rather slowly and cut around the bottom. The next thing I'm going to do is take the excess clay away. So I'm holding the tool like this, cutting into the clay, and again, slowly turning the wheel on to take that excess clay off. And it doesn't seem like I'm taking much off, but wait till you see the ball of clay that I end up with at the end of the session. So nice little bit of clay. I'm just going to toss that to the side because I will wedge that and reuse it. What's really nice about being a potter is that all of this waste, whether I'm at leather hard stage and I've trimmed something, all of those trimmings just get put into water and reclaimed and reused. So unlike sawdust, I can reuse my material, which is aces. So I'm just using this to also clean up my bottom a little bit more. And if I am not a very skilled potter, I'm also going to cheat a little bit by using the straight edge of my tool to push up against the side, smooth out my walls. And remember, before we were talking, I use a heavy grog material where if I were using porcelain, I could just use the sponge to do this, or a chamois. If I use a sponge on this, it's going to pull all the sand and the grog to the surface and going to make it a little bit rough, which sometimes is fine, depending on what you want. Thank you. I'm over 100 subs. That's wonderful. That means I can actually use Whitehall Pottery instead of like a random name. All right, so I'm also going to use my sponge. I'm going to clean it out of water. And then you do use your sawdust. What do you use it for? Explain to me. I'm assuming that you use it for maybe mixing with glue to fill in cracks, for fires, and chicken coops. Instruct me on how else you're using your sawdust. I'm very curious because we have a lot of it in the basement. All right, so I'm taking the sponge and I'm going down on the inside because I do not want the water to reside on the inside, because what will happen is that water will decay my piece and then I'll end up with a cracked bottom again. So you don't want any cracks in your bottoms, basically. All right. I'm also going to take the sponge and go over my bat just to get rid of some excess clay here. Just helps with the dust in the room. Filling cracks, incorporating in resin. You put it in resin, huh? Okay. All right, so we've got our little shot glass. This is a nice little espresso cup. We'll just put that to the side. I'm going to let it dry on the bat. I don't do a whole lot of trimming on these smaller pieces because I don't really need to. Get a nice flat bottom. I don't want to spill my coffee, but you get a nice flat bottom just by leaving it on the bat to dry. However, if I'm doing a bowl or a large plate or a salad vessel or a lidded vessel that I want it to have a little bit more tender love and care, I will cut it off the bat and trim it. So I'm going to move my little sign here down. You can still see it. That's awesome. I've got a stack of bats here. Ben went to one of the box stores and one of the hardware stores and bought a giant piece of MDF. It's very similar to like hardboard. It's basically recycled sawdust. Yes, you can definitely take risks in clay because you can always throw it again. All right, so I showed you the shot glass. We were successful, so I'm going to put those to the side. Maybe we'll make a lidded vessel at the end, depending on how much time. So I'm 20 minutes in. I wanted to show you how I throw these social distancing mugs. So this is about 1.5 pounds of clay. We're going to trim probably about 1/4 pound away. I've already wet my bottom here. I'm not going to employ the sodium silicate because that takes a bit longer. So I'm just going to do the smooth body version. And I haven't been specific about my height or my width on these because I like the idea of people being able to look at something and find their own personal choice in them rather than me making them all so similar, because I can make them similar now, or I can make them pretty darn close to exactly the same. But I'm kind of returning to the idea of no two being alike, just siblings. Oh, there are so many puns in pottery. There are puns in just about anything, especially this part. So this is the coning and the coning method of centering. So see, I've made a cone. And don't wince while I push it down. So I am using my body weight more than I am my arm strength. Number one, because it is a better technique. Number two, because you are going to get less tired. Do you smell that? How long have I been working in clay? So in college, I started sculpting in clay, but I hadn't been throwing because I was pretentious and I was like, oh, you know, how much messaging can you put through on functional pottery? Naive college student. So I was more of a sculptor, but I had worked in clay for a while. We purchased a kiln for Ben, who's also a sculptor, and he was using that. And then I want to say like 2012, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong. Around 2012, I built a pottery wheel. And tried using that. It was fine. I made like the wonkiest looking ashtray ever. And then about 2014, I won in the States, we love American football. Well, I don't really, but I participated in a football pool. So we all threw money in for the Super Bowl, and I ended up winning the entire lot. So it was like $1,200. So I decided, yeah, I'm gonna buy myself a pottery wheel because I really like it. And I bought it, and then I made some of the wonkiest looking pieces ever. Ben can attest, we still have a few of them. Most family and friends receive them as gifts because I thought, oh, I made a cylinder and it actually looks like a cylinder and holds water. So as I'm working here, I am thinking about the size of the bottom that I want this to be. I am also thinking about how thick of a bottom I want. I don't want it to be so thick that the mug gets really heavy and I lose a lot of clay for the walls to get it tall enough, because I did mention that the clay is going to shrink. This clay body shrinks about 12 to 14%, which means that the larger the piece, the more noticeable the shrink. Some people gift to Murderable. Yes, Carl. All right, so I've got my homemade. I've got the bottom to the width that I want it to be, and I've compressed my rim. I'm going to add a little bit more water here. I throw with a good bit of water. Some people barely throw with any water. My hands get quite dirty. I don't really care. I'm a muddy girl. What are you going to do? So I also have severe curvature of my spine, so I don't throw on this side of my pottery. I'm throwing wonky. But all I'm doing is this palm is putting pressure on the side of the piece, while this hand is putting pressure on the inside. As I'm putting pressure, I'm trying to go with the speed of the wheel as I pull up so that I get an even pull each time. And I'm completing my motion every single time. So you'll start to see it get taller. And unfortunately, I only have one camera, so you're not seeing it overhead, that it's also getting thinner as I pull it up. It's just physics. Again, I'm not using a whole lot of my body or a whole lot of my arm strength. Most of the strength is in my hands and in my body weight and positioning. Where I need to, I am holding and bracing myself into my hips with my elbows. That gets more important the heavier the clay that you're throwing with. This is about 1.5 pounds to about 1.75 pounds of clay. So it's not presenting a whole lot of struggle for me to throw it. And the very first thing that I'm doing is I'm just getting it to the height that I want it to be before I start shaping it. I'm also paying very close attention to my speed, because the taller that I get, the slower I need to go with my wheel. So now I'm at a pretty good height, but my walls are still pretty thick. That's okay though, because this is going to be a mug, and mugs you want to be a little bit thicker so that they hold the heat while you are drinking your hot coffee or your hot chocolate. So I'm just going to do one more pull up. Compress my rim, and now I've got my shape. The next thing I'm going to do is find my fish face tool. Now, rather than do what I did on the smaller piece and trim with my potter's knife, I'm going to use the mouth of the fish to create my flanged bottom. So I'm going to hold the piece like this and make sure I'm stabilizing with the other hand, because if I go like this, then I could destroy my whole piece. And for those of you that are new to pottery, it's very difficult when you're a beginner to do some of these techniques with confidence, and you're going to lose a lot of pieces as you go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert it towards the bottom, and I'm just going to hold it. And it's going to shape and take away material as I push in. So see, it's taking a little bit of material away. I can reuse this today with making handles if I want to. So I'm going to put that to the side so I can wedge it for later. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sponge and try and smooth out some of the tear out that's happening. Again, I'm using a heavy grog clay, and sometimes when you use these tools, it tears out a little bit. All right, so if I'm going to drink some coffee again, but if you look at the bottom of this piece, there's a little bit of a belly on the bottom. I'm going to show you how I do that. Ben made me this great tool out of walnut. It's shaped like a guitar body, sort of, or a peanut. This side is for smaller pieces, and this side is for larger pieces. I can take this and hold it. My fingers are touching each other in the hole here, so it helps me with stabilization. I'm going to take this and put it down inside to help me get an even belly. So see how my knuckle is also creating a shape? I just bring the piece up as I'm going to get that belly. Now I can make the belly go past the foot. I can make it sit right on the foot. I can make it a little more shallow, whatever I feel like, or what the clay wants to do. So Robert, you have a question. How do you predict the weight of the clay for the decided vessel? So generally speaking, if you want a 12 to 14 ounce mug, that's going to be, and I'm speaking in American terms here, that's going to be about 1 pound of clay. If you want a shot glass, that's going to be anywhere from 1/4 pound to 1/2 pound, depending on what type of shot glass. If it's a larger shot glass, obviously you're going to use a little bit more clay. If you're making a small cereal bowl, that's about 1.5 pounds. If you're making a large mixing bowl, that's about 5 pounds. So there are a lot of potters that share that information. You can find it online. Some of it's trial and error. I have a notebook of things that when I sketch ideas out, I'm estimating how much clay I'm going to use. You'll see a video in my library. I've only posted a few videos so far, but you'll see a video in my library where I'm experimenting with making a spaghetti holder, and I underestimated the amount of clay that I was going to use because they're not a common vessel. There weren't notes already existing, so I did fail the first one, and then the second one I got it to size. So if you're interested in watching that video, it's also a lidded video, so it's in my library. You bought my llama mug, awesome! That's a handleless cup, just so you are aware, but it has been on my shelf, and I'm so glad that you bought it. That's so great. I made that when I was trying to figure out how to do, and I don't know if you watch my Slap Together videos where I'm doing maker mugs, but I was making one for Anne of All Trades, so that was an experiment on what I wanted to do there. I will show you what I use to slow down the drying process, but you cannot add a whole lot of water back to your piece after you've thrown it. So you have to slow the drying process by using a bag, or some people use like indoor greenhouses. I want to keep moving on this, so I'm going to show you how I get the little lip rest. There's a lip rest at the top of this. It's a little bit inconspicuous, but it's nice when you drink your coffee to have something for your lip to rest on. So I'm taking this little spoon portion of my potter's knife, and I'm pressing my finger against it. And on the inside of my vessel, I want to make sure that my fingers are wet, but I'm just slowly turning the wheel on, and I'm using that to impress in the clay about 2 millimeters down. What is that? Quarter of an inch down to get my lip. So you should be able to see it on the camera. If not, I will pick up the piece at the end and show you. And then I'm just gonna smooth out the edge that's created either with my finger, or I have this handy dandy thinner sponge that I can go around the rim and around this part. I also like to put a little bit of an indentation below the lip so that I have a little ridge. Sometimes if I've got enough clay, I'll use my index finger on the inside to push it out to also get some more of that texture. So the last thing, again, I'm going to do is I am going to compress my bottom a little bit more with the sponge and remove water. I'm also going to use my sponge up the side a little bit to smooth out and make sure that I like the shape. And I'm going to clean off the back. The last thing I'm going to do is I have a very pointy chatter tool that I like to use to just clean up some of the excess that's underneath my trimmed piece at the bottom. This just helps me not to have a whole lot of cleanup to do once this piece gets dry. And yes, potters use sandpaper. And there are so many steps involved with every mug. That's why it's a little bit expensive. I sell my work on whitehallpottery.com. I used to sell it on Etsy, but they have been taking too much of a cut, and I find it easier to manage my my store with Square. So I use a free site called Weebly to build my sites, and then it's attached to a Square store. And Square allows me to organize, this is not an ad, Square allows me to organize my inventory and keep track of it a little bit better. All right, so I'm gonna bring this close to you so you can see that lip there. You can see the little bit of a fun bottom. And I'm gonna put this to the side. So this will dry probably a little bit bigger than this one, because I did use a little bit more clay than I was using with this prototype. What I'll do today at some point is I'll add a handle and probably add a badge of some sort. I'm so glad. Thank you. What I do for my badges is I 3D print logos. I have done quite a few for a lot of makers in the community, but my pride and joy right now is one that I'm making for UPMC Children's Hospital. Every year, children end up sick and unfortunately pass away. And one of the things that our society does is we hide things that are uncomfortable to look at or uncomfortable to talk about. So when these events happen, these families are left with having to rebuild without their loved one. And what UPMC is doing right now through their bereavement program and through their emotional support group is they are sending out care packages after the funerals and after everything quiets down, because that's the hardest time for families. And what's really exciting is that they have been reaching out to people in the maker community to employ almost like a maker ministry where we make pieces that get sent to these bereaved families. And I make these sunflower pieces, and I worked with them to design the sunflower logo that gets put on the front. And these pieces then probably about 15 to 20 a month get sent to UPMC. They basically pay for my time and my material, but it's an act of a labor of love to me. It's very sobering what I'm doing with them, but if you ever have an opportunity to share your craft with any organization like that that feels like they're speaking to your heart, do it, because it makes every moment in my studio feel much more worth it. The pieces that I make for myself help me to buy more clay, get better at my craft, and I love that I get to give back to my community with this this program. UPMC also does a summer camp, and unfortunately this year they had to cancel it due to COVID. And the summer camp is for the children that are left behind, the siblings in the bereaved families, and it's called Camp Wakchazi. I was asked to teach there this summer, but unfortunately they had to cancel it, so we weren't able to be involved this year, but I'm really looking forward to next year. So just wanted to take a minute to share that story, because I know our health workers right now are working overtime to keep us healthy and safe, and they also need emotional support. So just be thinking about those folks and how you can give back to your community. So just wanted to take a moment to talk about that. Let's move to the next vessel. So I talked a little bit about throwing a bowl. I've got about 15 minutes left here. I was going to see if I could throw a lidded vessel, but I don't think I'm going to have enough time. I probably needed to start throwing a lidded vessel at the very beginning. I hope you guys are getting some good information out of this and are maybe curious about trying pottery. A lot of potters after COVID will probably open up their studios. We have a library in Pittsburgh that actually has a full set of wheels, kiln, and allows you to throw in their basement, which is pretty cool. That's in Braddock, Pennsylvania. There are plenty of places where you can just go and decorate existing slip cast pottery. And, you know, you can always just buy a wheel and start working in your house. There are a lot of wheels that you can find on Facebook Marketplace. Unfortunately, one of the things that people don't tend to think about with pottery are all the steps and all the space that it takes up. So with pottery, you need a dry place to keep your clay and your materials for finishing, and your kiln and your pottery wheel. And if you have different weather in different places, you need to think about what time of year you're planning on throwing, because you don't want your clay to freeze. I throw in my house. There's a lot of dust. It's not ideal, but it works. So this is about 3 pounds of clay. Gets a little bit more strenuous to throw with this amount. And all I'm doing right now is I'm making sure that the clay has enough centering. It's even more important when you're throwing with a big amount of clay that you take the time to center it, because it's really hard to fix it once you get going. I tried glass blowing once. That was super fun, but super scary. All right, so I think I'm pretty good here, just for the sake of time. Bowls, depending, can take a bit. Just gonna get rid of some of this excess clay to help me out from the get. This is a cheat. This is a cheat. If you are having trouble where you can't get the bottom centered, you can do that. All right. So again, I'm thinking about how wide I want the bowl, how wide I need my bottom. It's easier to remove material than it is to add material. You guys know all too well. And I want to start by making an even, flat hockey puck, or curling puck in this case, because it's quite large. I'm not familiar with beads of courage. If you send me a link, I'd like to look at that. So I am just going to go ahead and start making my hole. Again, I am not going straight down in. I'm V'ing down into the bottom of the clay. And I'm going to leave myself enough material on the bottom, because usually for bowls, I am going to flip it over and finish the piece. By what I mean by that is I add a foot to the bottom and usually decoration. So I'm also going back in and I'm flattening out the surface and recompressing my rim. And then I start to pull it out and pull it up. What I'm doing with my hands is I'm kind of scooping to make my round shape. I wish you could see it in a different angle, because it's a little bit easier to understand what I'm doing that way, but hopefully you can still see. So each time I'm making a movement, I'm compressing the rim. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I only have a few more minutes left. Again, just at every motion, I'm pushing out and pulling up at the same time to create a bowl shape. I've got plenty of water down in there. So pushing out and pulling up. So it's making a nice bowl shape. And I'm getting wider and wider. There is a limit to the elasticity of the clay and how thin it is. So I have to be mindful of that as I'm doing that method. One thing I don't want to have happen is too much stress on the bottom, because it will collapse in on itself. So at some point, I'm going to slow the pottery wheel down. I'm going to slow my movements down. And I'm just going to keep stretching and pulling up. Stretching and pulling up. Now with 3 pounds of clay, you can get a pretty decent medium-sized bowl that's nice and heavy, that you can also trim the bottom. And I employ every part of my hand in this process, from my knuckles to my fingertips and the pads of my hand. One of the first bowls I ever turned was a flange bowl because I love a nice flange on the rim. But one thing that I've been learning about in making bowls is that I can also curl my rim over and make a nice fat rim so that if you're using it as a mixing bowl and you tend to hit your rims with your spoons or whatever you're using to mix, it gives it a little bit more tensile strength. So Jamie, while I am finishing up here, if you can put the link to the next presenter, I think it's Martin. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've got about 10 minutes left here. So I just want to say, guys, thank you so much for letting me be a part of your day, your evening, if it is evening for you right now. Thank you for coming and checking out something that maybe you didn't know you could be interested in. You can't put the links in. Oh, shoot. So I'm going to just flange this out a little bit so you can see the flanged bowl shape. I'm using these two fingers to pinch it and push it out. And then if I want to curl this under, I'm going to take this finger and use it as a prop, and then just push my flange even further until I round it over. See how it's moving? And I'm just gonna work, you just work slow, don't rush it. Make sure you have plenty of water for lubrication. And now I've got a nice fat round rim for mixing. And one thing that I want to do is replace one of my pieces that I ended up selling, because we like French toast in this house. So I'm going to make this a kind of flat, wide bowl so that I can dip my toast into it when I make my eggs. Again, I need to be mindful of how thick the bottom of my bowl is because I don't want to press it out too far. Now I've got a nice flat round bowl. So got a few more minutes, so if anybody has any additional questions, let me know while I wipe my hands off and clean up here. You guys are so welcome. I'm so glad I could show you how close it is to what you guys are doing. And I am starting to mix my pottery with my wood turning, which is a lot of fun. I'm learning to make lids for my pieces. Jamie was great last year and gifted me a really cool, easy wood turning tool. So that's been great. I also bought myself a few carbides. My dad gifted me a few Craftsman spoons, so I'm learning how to sharpen them. Awesome, thank you. All right, cool. Well, I will be visiting everybody else with the rest of the presentations today. Give you a couple of minutes just to get situated and get ready to go see the next presentation. Thank you guys all for joining me. It doesn't look like anybody has any additional questions. We've got about 7 minutes till the next presentation. So have a wonderful day. Again, thank you, Carl. Thank you, Jamie, for the invites and helping me get set up. This has been a great experience, and I hope to do more. If you guys want me to do more, I'm totally up for it. I also have been teaching some classes with the Fools with Tools podcast. It's a private group, so if you are interested in seeing some more specific demos, just hit me up and I'll add you to when I'm doing those. So. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks for pushing me past 100 subscribers. Let me know in the comments on those videos if there's something that piques your interest and you want to see me do. wood turning, we would call that a design a Viking bowl. Oh, awesome. That is super cool. Maybe I'll put some cool Viking symbols and stuff on it. You never know. But all right, guys, take care. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.